The secret of a shark's hammer, the longest neck since the dinosaurs. Every shape in nature, no matter how bizarre it may appear, evolved as a result of the struggle for survival.
Their heads are so weird.
Strangest of all, unique two-legged runners that conquer the globe.
Humans have a peculiar shape. No other animal has anything even approaching it.
How we got in the shape we're in. Right now on Evolve. At the start, 3.5 billion years ago, the shape of life was a single cell. But as life forms evolved, and the first primitive animals emerged, the shape those life forms took would, in large part, determine whether they would live or die.
Shape is such an important part of what makes an animal what it is. It influences the way it interacts with its environment, the way it interacts with other organisms, its own species, other species. Shape is a big deal.
Today, animals are shaped in so many different ways that, taken all together, each one begins to seem more bizarre and illogical than the next.
There are a lot of really weird animals in the world. If you've ever looked at a pangolin, they're really weird. If you've looked at a wrinkle-faced bat, they're crazy looking. You've got giant anteaters. There's all kinds of different weird animals in the world.
Yet every one of these strange bodies have evolved for a single purpose, survival. And few species have thrived as long as sharks. 400 million years ago, sharks evolved. At first in many different shapes. But once their sleek torpedo-like bodies developed, with jaws slung low and back, they became dominant predators. Their shape a success, they have changed little since. So why, 20 million years ago, would a new kind of shark appear that would survive to this day? The hammerhead, whose strange shape would baffle scientists until now. In the mangrove swamps of Florida, marine biologist Steve Kajiura chases down hammerheads for science.
It's on the right side of the boat.
He spotted a baby, but when fully grown, the hammerhead shark can reach 20 feet, with heads that can stretch out to span a full 4 feet across.
So what we have here is a bonnethead shark. This is one of the hammerhead species, and this is the hammerhead with the smallest hammer.
Kajiura is catching hammerheads in the wild to test them in his lab, looking for clues to explain how these strangely shaped creatures, numbering just 3% of all sharks, could evolve and survive.
The first hammerhead sharks appeared on the scene about 20 to 25 million years ago. About maybe 5% of the total evolutionary history of the sharks. So the hammerheads really are the new kids on the block.
At first, biologists were at a loss to make sense of such a peculiar head. There are many theories. The hammerhead might use its skull to pin down manta rays long enough to bite them to bits. Another theory points to the hammerhead's maneuverability in tight turns, arguing it could use its head like a fighter pilot uses wings to chase down the most elusive prey. Kajiura has a different idea. Every animal, humans included, give off a faint electrical charge when their heart beats or a muscle twitches. All sharks can detect this electricity pulsing around them through hundreds of minute dark pores peppered over their heads. Sharks rely on these electroreceptors to find creatures lying on the sea floor, even when they're camouflaged or remain completely still. Kajiura thinks the hammerhead's odd shape might give it an advantage in hunting, a bigger radar dish that would explain why the strange shape flourished. No one's ever tested for this, until now.
So we have a large tank here with a couple of bonnethead sharks and a lemon shark. What I'm going to do is take this plate, place it in the bottom of the tank, and you can see these electrode leads running from the center of these two targets. These lead up to a stimulator box on the surface, and I'm going to be able to activate one of those two electrodes and have the sharks come in and bite at them as if they were a natural prey item.
Kajiura's assistant adds an irresistible aroma to the tank: prey fish.
Odor brings an animal in from a distance. It enables the shark to detect, say, a bleeding fish and track it for a long distance to come in closer. When it comes to the final bite, they can never see what they're eating. The eyes are on the ends, the mouth is underneath. They have to rely on their electrosensory system to position their mouth over the prey item.
With the shark's appetite up, Kajiura turns on the electronic pulse.
I'm only passing 8.8 microamps of current, tiny, minute amount of stimulus, but it simulates the natural sort of electric field that a natural prey item would be producing.
The current is so minute that a pair of AA batteries could keep it going for 22 years.
Okay, electrode 1 is on, the electrode on the right, and so we'll see if the shark comes in to bite at that electrode. Here it comes, it's coming in. Oh, that was not the electrode that's active. It swam over that one without biting, you'll notice. And now it's coming back in, coming down, definitely searching. And there, good, look at that, good, clear, distinct biting right at the electrode, very clean.
The value of the charge is just a little higher than the charge given off by a human thought. It's enough to drive the hammerhead into a frenzy. In every instance, the hammerhead beats the pointy-headed lemon shark to the bullseye.
That's a male bonnethead shark who is biting at that one. The lemon shark is still cruising high in the water column.
To be fair, this particular lemon shark was moved from the wild into the tank just recently. But even in the wild, the hammerhead shape gives it an edge.
If you go along the beach with a metal detector and you have a big, large coil, you're going to cover a lot more ground than you would if you had a very small, narrow coil. And that's really all it takes is a small advantage compared to another competitor, which would enable one organism to take off and do very well.
Hammerheads have disadvantages too. They aren't as fast as some other sharks, and their ungainly heads keep them from pulling prey out of tight spots. But the shape of their head, likely appearing first as a genetic mutation, proved to be a successful adaptation. In the evolutionary future, the number of hammerheads may even increase. The predatory shark has evolved the perfect shape for offense. But what if you're on the defense? How do you survive the onslaught in a world of killers? This strange creature was unknown until it was spotted, first by fishermen off the coast of Indonesia in the 1990s. It looked like an octopus, but it could morph its shape in an instant to appear as seemingly any animal around it. At first, no one had any idea what it was.
The first time I saw it, I just was blown away. You couldn't get a more spectacular animal. It really is the pinnacle of wizardry.
Biologist Mark Norman was the first scientist to study this seemingly shapeless creature. He named it the mimic octopus.
The mimic octopus makes itself look like a living, moving animal. So it pulls all its arms around behind its body and swims along like a poisonous flatfish called a banded sole. In other cases, if it's getting attacked, it puts 6 arms down a hole and raises the other 2 arms to look like a poisonous sea snake that has bands along its body. If that's not enough, it'll swim along looking like a poisonous lionfish with these banded arms looking like the banded spines that come off these very deadly fish.
So far, 15 separate species are known to be in the mimic octopus act, and Norman is not always sure exactly what the mimic is doing. He observed this mimic scuttling along the sea bottom, looking something like a furry turkey with human legs.
Sometimes it's hard when you watch a mimic octopus doing what it does to interpret what's going on. It's a bit like looking at ink spots in a psychiatrist's office going, I don't know what that is. It could be a piano, it could be a fridge. So you get 3 or 4 divers together and you'll argue all night trying to work out what we think it was mimicking.
Where did nature's greatest actor come from? The answers begin 500 million years ago with the first monsters of the sea. Starting over 540 million years ago, in the Cambrian period, life exploded into an encyclopedia of shapes.
A whole bunch of body shapes that have never existed before suddenly appear. All of a sudden, there are body parts that never existed, things like shells.
What drove the development of shells was the evolution of new and deadly predators. For a species to survive the attacks, successful defenses would have to evolve. The Nautilus, with its elegant ringed shell, is today's reminder of those first shelled creatures. Tough enough to discourage small predators, it could move fast enough to evade bigger hunters that might swallow it whole.
The Nautilus shape is very aerodynamic. By jetting out water, it can actually jet backwards well over 15 miles an hour in short bursts.
Other shelled creatures may not have been so speedy. And in the 150 million years to come, many died out or evolved a new shape to survive. These are cuttlefish. They appeared around the same time as sharks 400 million years ago. They were like a nautilus, grown naked, without their shell. Their tough cartilage spine, the cuttlebone, helped propel them through the water.
By not being bound inside of a shell, they were able to squeeze into tighter crevices. Their body was very gelatinous in nature. They were able to crawl into rocks, crawl into caves, actively hunt in areas that nobody was able to hunt before.
This advantage was offset by their defenseless form. Without their shells, cuttlefish evolved an astounding ability to hide in plain sight.
Cuttlefish are hardwired, genetically driven to camouflage on any visual background we give them.
Biologist Roger Hanlon has been trying to unravel the mysteries of cuttlefish and their cousins, the octopus, since he first encountered one changing color in 1968.
I can't help it. Every time I think I've seen something amazing, they'll do another little twist that takes my breath away.
Even in the lab, presented with the most unnatural background, a checkerboard, the cuttlefish can adapt.
We're going to slide in the new pattern on the bottom. There it comes, just like that. So now it's got a new visual background, and we can check the monitor and see its change.
Never having encountered anything like it in nature, the cuttlefish takes a stab at its first impression, changing from brown to gray in just a few seconds, even creating a passable rectangle on its back.
It sees white checkers about the same size as that, turns on a disruptive pattern.
It's not perfect, but it's close enough to fool a predator. Scientists have long known that cuttlefish skin changes on signals from its brain, but no one has ever been exactly sure how these signals were transmitted. Chemical hormones in the blood was the popular theory. Hanlon's team, building on earlier research, found the answer wasn't chemistry, it was electricity. The skin of the cuttlefish and all the rest of the octopus family are lined with 2 layers of color-producing cells. Chromatophores on top are pigmented red, yellow, and brown. Iridophores beneath have no color of their own, but can appear as a number of shifting, shimmering, iridescent colors, depending on the angle of light. As the cuttlefish swims, the brain reads the changing light passing through the eye, triggering electrical instructions in the nervous system. As the iridophores shift with the light, the top layer cells adjust into the right color blend to add up to a match.
is quite amazing. It's sort of electric skin in the sense that there are millions of these little pigmented cells in the body, and they would create the illusion of passing bands and clouds across the skin.
The smart skin system can fool a predator in two ways, creating a close match to the background, or a pattern that disrupts recognition of the shape of the cuttlefish. "200 million years later, another cousin of the cuttlefish also lost its shell and employed the same smart skin to hide: the octopus. Unlike the cuttlefish, the octopus had no bones at all. It was pure, flexible muscle. The most elastic body shape on the planet.
You can think of them almost as a liquid animal. They're plastic, they can change how much their arms get pulled in close to their body. But on top of that, they have this most amazing skin. The skin can not only change colour in really fine detail, it's almost like high-definition skin, but it can also change shape, so they can push up little branches of skin or little bumps, which means it can impersonate the shapes of rubble or corals or reefs.
The octopus hides for defense from predators and to sneak up on prey. In this footage, an octopus stalks and then pounces on a crab. As we have seen, newly discovered Indonesian mimic octopus has added an important skill: the ability not only to blend in with the background, but to assume the shape of frightening predators.
I don't think they learn their models as they grow. I think this is an evolutionary memory.
Biologist Mark Norman believes the mimic evolved perhaps 50 million years ago, when it moved out of the safety of coral reefs in search of new food sources and onto the shallow sandy plains off the Indonesian coast, where even an octopus can't hide.
When you swim around in these areas, there's no protection, no reef, no coral cover. It'd be like trying to match a white piece of paper. And the only other animals that are out during the day on these sand plains are covered in spines or are poisonous.
For the evolving mimic, the flip side of survival of the fittest was death to bad actors.
No predators will allow a bad mimic to live more than about 3 minutes. These animals have evolved into such tight mimics because they have such bad critics.
While life on Earth got its start in the sea, there was a whole new frontier waiting to be conquered. The first fish-like creatures crawled onto land around 400 million years ago. Their shapes would have to evolve if they were to have any chance to survive.
Take a fish on land, and what happens? Of course, it falls over. It lies on its side.
Harvard zoologist Ferris Jenkins has been digging up fossils of the first land animals for decades. They all had limbs, and the fish did not. If one evolved from the other, where was the missing link? Jenkins joined a team of paleontologists that were looking for it in a remote spot in northern Canada. After 6 years of digging, in 2004, they hit pay dirt, the fossil of a fish just beginning to evolve into a four-legged land animal.
And we realized we had found something that nobody ever quite had fully seen before.
This spectacular find is clearly a fish.
I can see the bones that supported the gills that this animal still had. It is a fish because when you look at the body that lies behind the head, it's covered in these scales.
But turn the fossil over, and it reveals something startling.
Here, for the first time, was a vertebrate animal with a distinct separation of the head from the body, and that's called a neck. And what's a neck useful for?
The answer is for living on land. No fish has a neck. Only land animals have them.
Well, of course, in the water, a fish can orient its entire body and therefore its head in any direction it wants and do it with great facility and ease. But an animal that's amphibious, an animal that's come out onto land, cannot move the body so quickly. And in feeding, needs to move the feeding apparatus in the direction of prey, and therefore a neck becomes critical.
An even greater revelation lay in the creature's strange appendages, found separated from the fossil body, but perfectly preserved.
Now, along the margin of the limb, there are a series of small elements called radials. There's usually about 8 of them out there. And these are beginning to look like digits, which are going to become essentially a hand. Here is the first evidence of that transformation between fin and limb. This is, indeed, a missing link.
The team came up with a new name for their incredible find, Tiktaalik, a local Inuit word for a large shallow water fish. Some 375 million years ago, Tiktaalik crawled from the muck and forever altered the shape of life on Earth. Here was the very beginning of our own hands, feet, wrist, and neck.
Ultimately, their descendants would give rise to all of the land-living vertebrate animals that we know about today, including people.
This is the start of one of the greatest evolutionary stories of all time.
In the eons to come, the primitive limbs that are first visible in Tiktaalik would develop in reptiles, birds, amphibians, and mammals like us. Mammals whose bodies would stretch, squash, and twist into 1,000 variations on a single theme, all in the struggle to survive. Mammals like us first evolved some 125 million years ago. Our general body form, once established, never changed.
Mammals all share a similar basic skeletal shape. Backbone, limbs in the front, limbs in the back, a head at the top, a tail.
But while all mammals are generally the same shape, there are many variations, some of them unique and some even strange. This is a star-nosed mole, named for the strange 22-point star-like organ on the tip of its face.
The animal itself is very bizarre looking. When you just look at its face, you see these appendages spanning around the nostrils.
Ken Catania studies the star-nosed mole at Vanderbilt University in Nashville.
When you look in detail at it, the mystery only gets deeper because it looks like nothing else on the planet. You're left wondering if the star-nosed mole is from Mars or what. How did it evolve?
Though the strange mole was first identified well over 100 years ago, scientists have never clearly understood its purpose. Moles are nearly blind, and the long-standing theory suggested the star organs served a similar function as the head of a hammerhead shark. A radar dish, sensing its way through tunnels and towards prey. But Ken Catania discovered the long-held theory is wrong.
In reality, it's a skin surface, and it is full of touch receptors. It's just packed with tens of thousands of little tiny organs that are used for touch.
The star-nosed mole lives its entire life in a labyrinth of underground passages where the competition for food is fierce.
There's actually many other species of small mammals that go through the same tunnels.
With phenomenal accuracy and speed, the thousands of touch-sensitive organs on the star locate tiny food sources fast.
They're actually in the Guinness Book of World Records for how quickly they can detect something and eat it. It takes them about 1/5 of a second once they touch something to grab it in their mouth, swallow it, and go on looking for something else.
To get enough nutrition to survive, the star-nosed mole needs to be eating almost all the time. The star allows that to happen. But where did it come from? Skin is not preserved in the fossil record, so Catania turns to an examination of a star mole embryo, because the development of the embryo is, in part, a replay of the evolutionary past.
What we actually see in the embryonic development is that these things form in place on the side of the face, and then shortly after birth, peel forward.
Most creatures develop appendages, like arms, differently.
animal appendages exist on a huge diversity of different animals, and they all basically form by growing out of the body wall, successively extending out from the skin surface.
The mole embryo scan suggests that millions of years ago, the mole's face developed bands of sensitive skin. Over time, the bands shifted from the side of the face to cluster together at the tip of the nose, and finally, to peel forward like a banana into the present star.
This is a completely bizarre developmental sequence. You might argue that it's somewhat inefficient and poorly engineered, and those are just the kinds of things that provide some of the strongest evidence for evolution. If you start out with a blank slate and create something, you do it the most efficient way you can. But if you need to change things subtly out of existing parts, you often end up with something that works, but could have been done in a better way.
Land animals continued to develop in unusual ways. Several species eventually evolved to return to life in the water, nature's version of retrofitting. Parts built for land were reshaped over millions of years for life in the water. One of the first mammals to go back to the sea was the ancestor of today's platypus.
Platypus have this big bill that makes them look like a bird, even though they're not birds. They have a weird spur that comes off the ankle that they can use to inject venom. They have weird bones that stick out of the pelvis. They have densely matted fur. They're just weird-looking animals.
When platypus were first discovered, they actually thought it was a hoax. When they actually sent specimens to London to the museum, they actually thought that it was made up from different parts of an animal.
The platypus has been completely reshaped by the survival challenge of its environment.
If you look at the bill of a platypus, they use that for finding food on the muddy bottom of a stream. The webbed feet are used for swimming. If you look at that densely matted fur, it helps them stay waterproof when they're swimming around. All body shapes work for what they do because otherwise natural selection would have gotten rid of them.
Other mammals returned to the sea more recently and transformed their shapes even more radically than the platypus. This mammal, looking like a kind of cross between a dog, a rat, and a deer, returned to the sea some 40 million years ago and totally transformed its shape. Did Captain Ahab know he was really chasing Moby Dog? From their distant origins 190 million years ago, mammals have spread to every corner of the Earth, changing shape to fit in. But of the over 5,000 different mammal species alive today, perhaps none has undergone a transformation more extreme than Pakicetus. Looking something like a cross between a dog and a rat, but genetically closer to a hippo, this land mammal began a journey to a new life and a new shape 50 million years ago when it took to the sea.
They had forelimbs and hind limbs, and they walked around on land. And as they moved into the aquatic environment and spent more and more time in the water, they gradually lost that need to have hind limbs and forelimbs. The forelimbs were developed into flippers, and the hind limbs were lost.
The result, millions of years in the making, was the whale. Grown huge in its buoyant ocean home, but still retaining its mammalian roots. Whales today remain warm-blooded mammals, breathing air into lungs, feeding young milk from giant mammary glands, and even growing hair. This skeleton of an 87-foot blue whale clearly reveals the remnants, 50 million years later, of Pakicetus's paw, with digit bones now collapsed into a fin, like a hand in a mitten. While whales found a better home in the sea, Most mammals remained on land, their shapes continually evolving to fit the environment, a complex combination of factors molding their shapes, like the giraffe's familiar and still mysterious long neck.
Darwin pointed out that giraffes have long necks because they feed on the leaves at the top of trees. But their necks don't really need to be that long, otherwise no baby giraffe would ever make it to being an adult. There's got to be stuff to feed on at those shorter heights. So what's up with this long neck?
There are 3 reasons for it that we know of now.
Nikos Solonius, professor of anatomy at the New York Institute of Technology, agrees that treetop feeding is one factor affecting the giraffe's neck. To make it work, the giraffe has evolved the most powerful heart in nature. The distance from the heart to the giraffe's head is so long that it needs a special blood supply system to prevent it from fainting every time it lowers its head due to changes in blood pressure. To keep the blood pumping properly, the giraffe's heart has ballooned to enormous size, 25 times larger than a human heart. In 2001, scientists discovered a second advantage influencing the giraffe's long neck: communication. In a gesture called the head throw, giraffes often will lean back and hold their position. The head throw is accompanied by vocalizations too low for humans to hear, infrasound, also used by elephants and rhinoceros.
And you can tell the other giraffe is listening because they turn their head around or they move their ears.
Solonius argues that long necks may have evolved 8 million years ago when their habitats were crowded.
Those days, in the forest and the savanna, there were 3 or 4 times more species of animals than there are today. For example, there were 6, 7 species of zebras instead of 1. There were 7, 8 species of rhinoceroses instead of 1. And there were a lot of antelopes around. So it was a very noisy time.
High above the din, giraffes took advantage of their evolving personal cell phone towers to get a clear, interference-free signal. And there's a third factor. Giraffes use their heads as weapons.
Male giraffes use their neck as a flexible club. They swing their necks around and pass each other real hard to establish territories, and the winner has the more females.
Because giraffes with longer, more powerful necks were more likely to win females and mate, they bred over time giraffes with even longer necks. But with long necks came danger. Giraffe horns were once long and sharp, like their antelope cousins.
When the giraffe strategy of fighting happens and the neck gets longer, the horns can actually kill the opponent. What happens is the horns, we see in evolution evidence for the horns to be more blunt, so they won't kill the opponent, because although fighting is very formidable, in evolution you don't have one individual kill the other individual. Only humans kill each other.
From the point of view of evolution, sex, attracting a mate and reproducing, is the entire point of life. The need for male display for the attraction of females has caused the evolution of an amazing variety of shapes. Some, like the peacock, seem beautiful. For others, it's harder to see the appeal. This is the stalk-eyed fly. Though these may look like antennae, they are actually the head of the insect. Their brains fill out the stalk, and their eyes rest on top.
You wouldn't imagine these on this planet unless you saw them, because their heads are so weird.
Biologist Gerald Wilkinson sees insects as evolution's open book.
Insects are great systems for exploring shape and evolution because they to become an incredible variety of shapes with structures coming off of their heads weird horns coming out of their bodies.
In his University of Maryland lab, Wilkinson breeds thousands of stalk-eyed flies. The size of male stalks vary, and Wilkinson discovered size matters. Females generation after generation prefer to mate with the longer stalk males. A baffling behavior because the long stalks seem to hurt the species' ability to survive.
If you have eye stalks, it's more difficult to accelerate or to maneuver when you're flying. And consequently, it's hard to see what advantage a fly would gain by putting your eyes on the ends of stalks.
For clues, Wilkinson looks at male stalk-eyed embryos, or larvae, trying to isolate the genes just as they form the eye, head, and brain.
So to find the genes that affect the head, we have to find the tissue that turns into the head. And that tissue is actually beginning to form at the larval stage.
By isolating these long stalks and short stalks, just as they were forming in fly embryos or larvae, Wilkinson discovered the difference between them. The short stalks lack the chromosome vital to produce males. They can't have sons, only daughters. The short stalk is a species killer.
If not stopped by some process, that should actually eventually cause a population to disappear, because you run out of males, you're left with only females.
The long stalk may look bizarre to us, but to a female fly, it's a clear indicator of the best choice of mate. Far from endangered, stalk-eye are an evolutionary success, appearing in the fossil record much as they are today. For the last 50 million years, their strange shape the key to their success. Over thousands and millions of years, animal shapes rise and fall. The most successful flourish, no matter how strange. Weird necks, strange ears, and nearly hairless skin. Welcome to the strange world of humans.
We are no less bizarre or peculiar than a star-nosed mole.
For 3.5 billion years, life has thrived on planet Earth. The shape of each organism forged by multiple factors. The human body, too, has been shaped by evolutionary need into a unique form.
Things like a hammerhead shark, the neck of a giraffe. All of these things strike us as being somewhat peculiar. Well, you know what? That's really no more peculiar than we are. Humans do indeed have a peculiar shape, and it's quite unique. No other animal has anything even approaching it.
The focus of anatomist Bruce Latimer's work is the evolution of the human body. He believes we were shaped in large part as a result of a single behavioral change in our ancestors. They stood up.
We've been walking upright for at least, I would say, 4.5 to 5 million years. And we are a striding biped, which is to say we stand on one foot at a time. That's a very different way to get around, and as far as we know, no mammal, save ourselves and our immediate ancestors, has ever even tried to experiment with this kind of locomotion.
Latimer believes that pre-humans stood in order to free their hands so they could carry food and make it easier to nurture their young. He believes that free hands led to the development of tools, which led to cooked foods, which led to better nutrients and a larger brain. This would enable us to spread across the world, all from just standing up, a change that shaped our body, starting with the spine.
This is a female gorilla. You'll notice that that spine is essentially straight.
To accommodate the biomechanics of walking, the spine transformed over millions of years into a winding set of 4 curves.
In your lower back, no other mammal has a lumbar lordosis. The reason we did that is because we couldn't block the birth canal. In order to keep that open, we had to keep our sacrum tilted the way it is. Because of that, our head would be out in front of us, which you really couldn't walk like that, so we had to create a curve. That curve creates the hollow in our back. Now, having once accomplished that, so we can get our torso over our hips so we can balance, then we'd be leaning backward too far. So we put in another curve in the opposite direction, and then our head would be sticking out too far in the front. So in order to balance that, we put in another curve here at our neck.
A lengthened and curved spine, knees closer together than hips, a barrel chest. All of these are a result of a determined effort over 1 million years to walk, a skill that still does not come easy.
You really don't learn how to walk until you're 8 or 9 years old. And if you look at the gait of a young child, it's not like an adult. It takes you quite a while to develop those neuromuscular pathways that allow you to do this thing. Another example is that blind children will not spontaneously stand up. They have to be taught to stand up, so it is truly a learned behavior.
Scientists are still trying to understand the basics of what most of us take for granted. Since 1990, scientists and engineers in a robotics lab at the Free University of Brussels in Belgium have been trying to create a robot with human proportions that can walk freely.
Our human body is an incredible complex machine. We have over 600 muscles, and we do not completely understand how we walk and run. So therefore we can build robots with less complexity to try to understand.
The result?
We had a lot of problems and often the robot fails to work. The feet are quite small, so the robot always risks to fall over.
While man's quest to walk upright has influenced the shape of our body, some other creatures also decided to walk on 2 legs. Dinosaurs, like T-Rex, also evolved to move on 2 legs. And today, the dinosaurs' descendants, land-based birds, do the same. Capable of speeds up to 65 miles an hour, the flightless and bipedal ostrich, the fastest running bird, can outrun predators like lions on its powerful long legs. And flamingos feed in swampy waters on 2 legs, keeping their feathers dry. Among mammals, though, humans have another biped companion, the kangaroo.
Kangaroos are shaped in a really sort of a weird way. They have these big, strong hind limbs and these short little Tyrannosaurus rex-like forelimbs and a big, huge tail. And when they're moving slowly, they do something called pentapedal locomotion, where they walk on their forelimbs and their hind limbs and their tail at the same time. But then when they want to go fast, they just pick their hind limbs up and they jump, they bounce, using their tail to keep their center of balance while they jump around in the outback of Australia.
The Australian landscape is massive, and kangaroos' big feet may have evolved to help navigate it.
Kangaroos evolved about 50 million years ago from possum-like marsupials. The first kangaroo-like animals could be seen 30 million years ago, and by 25 million years ago, kangaroo evolution was well on its way.
The hopping motion depends on elastic tendons in the hind legs, so moving takes up very little energy in the kangaroo. A must for survival when you have to cross huge areas of land.
For kangaroos, it's all about just like, we're out of food, let's go for a walk. And then they go for 100 kilometers and get to a new patch of food.
The kangaroo shape has evolved to be a perfect fit with its environment. Otherwise, it would not have survived. And while bouncing may be the most efficient way for a mammal to travel on foot, it's not likely that other species will follow the kangaroo's example.
It's not like horses can look and see how kangaroos are doing and decide to start pointing their evolution in that way, get rid of the way they're running and start hopping on their hind limbs. That's not how natural selection works. To a large extent, it was probably luck that got kangaroos pre-adapted to start using that bouncing locomotion. But now that they have it, they're moving more economically than any other kind of creature.
From the outback to under the sea to the sky, every creature owes its unique shape to the powers of evolution, to change over millions of years. molding limbs, heads, and shells into a form that can survive. As life on Earth moves toward its 4 billionth year, the shape of things will continue to evolve.